Hello Tubesters, and welcome to another one of my videos. I just wanted to give you a brief, or not so brief, look at the wet palette, as it says in the description on the title. Myself and Mick at the MGH 1376 channel, we were having a chat, as we do. We have these painting chats on Skype, and I was just explaining to Mick about my wet palette. Now, obviously Mick knows about them. You know, it was mainly the fact of how much water, really, I was trying to explain how much water I put on a wet palette, which, you know, because sometimes they can get either too swampy or too dry. So this is just a brief video. It might help somebody, and it's more for Mick so he can actually see the wet palette itself. So I'm going to go down to the bench and we'll just have a quick squiz at this wet palette. You know, it's only a homemade one. There are lots that you know, if you don't want to make your own, there's loads you can buy on the market, as I'm sure you all know. And it's not something that hasn't been covered in 1,000,001 other videos by people. It's just, well, one, it's my channel, and I always say I put on what I like, and two, it's really just to show Mick, you know, the type of water, the amount of water I use on the palette, and as I say, it just might help somebody else out there. So if you want to join me on the bench, and we'll just have a quick look at this palette and have a quick discussion about it. I'll see you in a minute. Hello guys, and thanks for joining me on the bench. This is the wet palette in question. Again, it's just a homemade job. Although the camera's on its little tripod, I'm just going to move it away because I can't get everything in shot, just so you can just see what I'm talking about. Now, that is a ceramic dish. I believe it's used for putting peanuts and things like that on. But obviously I've appropriated it for making into a wet palette. So we'll get back a bit closer. So I've tried, I tried a wet palette a few years ago, and I made it out of an old takeaway plastic tub, you know, you put curries in here in the UK, but it was high-sided, and I'd used like a bathroom cleaning sponge, and I find, my own personal way I paint, I just like to move my hand over to the wet palette, obviously collect my paint, come back to when I'm painting, and I tended to find I was having to come in at too steep an angle and kept knocking my hand against the sides, and it really put me off, because it will take you, you know, a week or two to get used to it, I suppose, using a wet palette. So the more, is it ergodynamic? I don't know, whatever it is, anyway, in Gav speak, whatever works for you. So, you know, you can use a saucer, you can use a little thin Tupperware box, you know, some type of plastic receptacle, whatever you want to do. This is really straightforward stuff. The reason we use a wet palette, if there are any, you know, guys and gals out there that are only just taking up the hobby, or figure painting in general, a couple of reasons. If you live in a really hot country, or the 2 or 3 weeks a year in the UK that we get these you know, blazing hot weeks these days, I always used to paint on a ceramic tile, and that's another tip if anybody doesn't want to keep using these little artists' palettes. Ceramic tiles are fantastic. A white ceramic tile, bathroom tile, brilliant. The only problem is, obviously, they can't retain the moisture, so the paint dries out really quick sometimes, especially in the summer. So this was my answer. If you're going to use a wet palette, it'll keep you. If you put it in the fridge, particularly, it will keep your paint mixed up for weeks. The only thing you'll have to do is you'll find like a milky residue on the surface of the paint. You just mix that back up again. Occasionally, it might make your paint slightly more watery, just with obviously the moisture content that's been around it, and you may have to put a dab more paint in just to thicken it. Again, it's personal preference on that one. But I actually don't put it in the fridge at all. Yeah, I'm not in a hot country, but all I do with mine, to be honest, I paint in the night. At night I paint till, you know, 10, 11 o'clock at night. When I'm finished painting, I just put a dab more water. I just lift the kitchen towel and that I'll have underneath it. Put like a thimble full of water in, and put a piece of plastic card over the top, or anything else. The problem with cardboard is it tends to suck up the moisture, and it'll bend, and obviously then you haven't got such a tighter seal. So I use a piece of plastic card that you'd use for scratch building, and I put that on the top. And my wet palette, using that method, just rehydrating it when it needs to, it would probably last me a week. It doesn't, only because I run out of paper. You know, obviously I paint for a living, so it probably lasts me about 2 days before I change them over. It can be tedious cutting up the baking parchment, so I normally just do it all in one hit. You know, probably cut up a dozen size pieces. So this is what we're looking at. First of all, we have our kitchen towel. Any old kitchen towel, cut roughly to shape. I cut the corners off just to make it fit better, because I found with this particular dish, if the corners of the kitchen towel hang over a bit, it tends to suck up the water and drip it onto my cutting mat, and I tend to put my arms in it all the time. So that's me. This is really the only bit that really needs videoing. So again, Gav's giving you all this blurb for nothing. But cold water. Let's see if she how far she absorbs all this. I can't tip it too far because it tipping out. Do with a bit more. Again, you all try it yourselves, and it's personal preference. But that looks about right for me. And for a change, it's almost free of dog hairs. Tiny bit more maybe. There we go. Then I've got myself my baking sheet, parchment, whatever you want to call it. You know, it's the stuff for putting cakes on when you're baking them. Now, it's very, very badly cut up because that's how I roll. It literally, I just, you know, cut rough segments off. If you've got any sense, you'll actually put that almost to the edge of the parchment, to the towel. Don't go right over the edge of the kitchen towel, because what you'll find is the edges will curl up slightly, as that one is there a bit. So cut them within the confines of the kitchen towel. This one's a bit, I had 2 or 3 offcuts to be honest with you, and that's what I've done here. And that's all it is. So as you can see, it's not floating around. If you can see the white on the white on the white, but it's not floating around. You can move it, but it's, you know, it's not soaked up. And that's what you want. You might find the odd spottle of water. Just get your kitchen towel and dab that off, because you don't want to over dilute your paint. I thought I'd just give you a quick look at. I'm not going to go into glazes and all that stuff. That's for another video, should I ever get an overhead camera set up. But hang on, can you see that up the corner? Hopefully you can. I didn't want to put it right in the middle, because I tend to work in a line and work up towards the baking sheet, because normally I've got this turned around the other way. But I just wanted to give you a rough idea. Let me just see if we can get in a bit on that. Right, oops. That's some Vallejo Model Black. And this is what I do. I've got my jar of water, and I use my trusty little barbecue skewer here. And that, if you can see, that is roughly what I would call a weak enough paint mix to do all my painting with. Do it slightly thick if you want to do a base coat, but that's roughly what I will paint with. Now that little blob there, if you were to leave it, if you were doing it in my method where you literally just peel the corner back and put a bit of water in at the end of the day, it probably still would last you a good few days. I think 3 days probably. If you did the thing where you've got a pocket, you know, you've got a pocket plastic box of some description, and you go and put it in your fridge, then you might well even last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you know, and come back to it. As I say, you will get like a white film on it, but you just mix it back into the paint, and you're good to go. So Mick, I hope that that covers everything. As I say, it doesn't help with a white dish on a white kitchen towel on a white baking parchment, but it gives you some idea. But that is Gav's wet palette, and that's what I use day in, day out. As I say, it'll last me, that particular, alright, that one's quite a small piece of baking parchment, but it'll still probably last me a couple of days before I have to you know, renew it. And that's about it really. You know, obviously go with what you don't have to use kitchen towel. You can use one of those very thin yellow sponges. A lot of the people that's used for washing dishes out, a lot of people use them. But I would strongly advise anybody, give it a go. You don't, to be honest, you won't look back, I don't think. My dish is really small because I've got a confined table space here, and I can't really have anything bigger. A lot of the guys that maybe do big figure painting, where they're really swishing around all those glazes and wet blending, they tend to have bigger palettes. But again, horses for courses. So guys, thanks a lot for listening to me waffling on again, but I just wanted to show Mick that, and I just thought it might be of interest to anybody else that's passing by. So thanks a lot guys, and I'll catch you again on another video. Cheers.